Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and this is a big one guys. We're going to be looking at my predictions for best healers for 9.1 in terms of Mythic Plus. The video is going to be split into two. The first part is going to be looking at Tormented and the Lieutenants and the powers and how the anima powers that you get from the Lieutenants could provide some meaningful choices for your healer. And then after that, we'll be ranking healers based on my predictions and basically how they performed on the PTR when I was testing them. Before we're gonna start the video, big disclaimer. Even though the patch release date has been announced, there's still going to be heroic or mythic raid tuning that could in fact alter the balance of Mythic Plus. And on PTR I've tested every single healing spec, using similar dungeons like Halls of Torment, possibly Mistweaver Monk, doing the same kind of key level, doing similar affixes, in order to try and see how each healer is going to perform in a similar situation. Keep in mind the gear was scaled to 2 to 6, which is actually relatively low for plus 15s in 9.1 when gear scales up a lot higher. So you would expect better gear when trying to approach these dungeons when 9.1 is going to hit. And of course guys, these videos take me ages to edit, so if you enjoy or like this type of content, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel. It allows me to continue making these videos. So let's go and get started with the Affix overview, and that is Tormented. So there's going to be 4 lieutenants in total, and I feel 2 of those are going to provide a significant challenge, especially when you do keys beyond 15s. And one of them is basically a prideful with ticking damage. So let's go and look at some of the more difficult ones, and that is going to be the healing reduction lieutenant, and that is a lieutenant that's going to provide you 50% healing reduction and is going to apply a bleed. Now the problem with this is that, hey, the bleed can be removed by a lot of abilities, including Bob or Blessing of Protection from Paladins, which again, this is in my opinion going to be immunity kind of lieutenant, because at really high key levels the healing reduction plus the bleed effect can be extremely deadly. You also cannot really line aside, because if you do attempt to line aside, it's gonna pick the next person and it's going to do it really quickly, and you could possibly mess up the whole rotation of who do you want the bleed to get on. And the new addition to this is that you have to stay close to an ally. This was introduced a couple of days ago, so basically Blizzard wants you to stack or stay close to somebody else. Then it's gonna pick somebody that's gonna put a bleed on, and it's also gonna splash if you don't move out quickly. And you have to remember, you can skip these lieutenants, but you're gonna get a specific aura on the last boss. And I feel skipping lieutenants on tyrannical weeks is probably not going to be the play. And skipping this lieutenant might feel a little bit bad, because this lieutenant provides you with some really powerful anima powers. And this is the first time as a healer you might have to make a meaningful choice. You will have an option between getting infinite mana or the blue spheres type of anima power where you can pick them up on the ground, they're gonna spawn and they're gonna give you mana back. Or you can pick something like a stat boost or stat increase that in turn also is going to increase your DPS. And we're going to cover which anima powers I picked up later when we talk about the healer. And then after that we're gonna have a fire lieutenant, which is basically the first or really big healing check. This is your prideful. There's going to be a ticking AoE damage happening to everyone in the party. You cannot prevent this, you just have to heal through it. There's going to be a unavoidable fire AoE damage happening if you miss an interrupt, so technically this should never happen. And there's going to be a magic debuff that increases your fire damage taken, which can be master spelled, and priests might have a bit more utility here. But generally speaking, this is your prideful. You might have to save cooldowns or healing cooldowns when approaching this lieutenant. Then you will have what I call Frozen Boy, and Frozen Boy is gonna apply a constant slow on everybody. This can be mitigated or avoided, or you can use movement speed abilities, you can shift out of forms and things like that to help out. You can go into your Ghost Wolf form if you're a shaman. You can use things like Tiger's Lust and things like that. So generally speaking, there's going to be a constant slow, and there's going to be a bunch of abilities to dodge. Besides the dodging and the constant movement decrease, there's going to be a person selected that's going to take some significant single target damage. And here, having a healer that provides good single target healing is going to be quite strong, because the dot even at 15 was pretty hard. But generally speaking, this lieutenant is definitely on the easier side if you can dodge stuff. It is important because this lieutenant drops anima power that a lot of times you might skip because they're not that big. But if you remember when I talked about the healing reduction lieutenant, you can pick the infinite or blue spheres. What if you don't pick the blue spheres and you go with a stat increase and you still have mana issues? You can kill the Frozen Boy and you will be able to pick up an anima power that's going to increase your drinking speed. So all of a sudden, you'll be able to stop and drink and get your mana back to the similar extent that sugar-crusted fish feast used to provide in Legion. Blue spheres for infinite mana and just forget about everything else, or stat increase from your healing reduction lieutenant plus increased drinking speed equals good mana, good DPS. Which one are you going to pick? We'll cover that later on. And the last guy, which I call the Robot Boy, used to be insanely irrelevant before he got a bunch of new abilities added. So now this guy is going to be a tank buster. It's going to do damage on a tank. And it's also going to pull everyone in the group. It's going to start doing this like AoE ability underneath it. And you're going to be rooted. So all of a sudden you either have to use some root breaking abilities or just DPS your root down. On a 15, the HP of the root was really insignificant. But I feel like at later stages it might become harder. But generally speaking, out of the lieutenants that I approached, I found the two, the fire one and the healing reduction one, to be the hardest. And the other ones could be somewhat mitigated by good dodging or good priority DPS. So let's go and have a look at the healers and how they're going to perform in 9.1 in Mythic Plus with Tormented. Let's go. And the top healer for Mythic Plus in 9.1, in my opinion or my predictions, is still going to be Holy Paladin. I honestly feel that if you watch my raid video, the changes that Holy Paladin received, there is a list of changes, like a huge list. That list doesn't provide enough implications towards the gameplay or towards the damage loss for Holy Paladin to not be relevant anymore. You probably will experience around 15% damage reduction for Ventier Holy Paladin due to the DPS nerfs. But the fact that Holy Paladin is so far ahead of everyone else in terms of DPS, it is kinda irrelevant. You have to look at the Affix, you have to look at Mythic Plus right now. You don't have Prideful. You have one lieutenant that kinda requires Prideful healing, but the healing requirement is going to drop to some extent. So my honest prediction towards 9.1 is that every healer is going to go this DPS route, or at least in really high keys where you're going to try and use DPS trinkets, DPS legendaries, or if your healer has a DPS option, you're going to go that option. And that's what I feel the meta is going to be, which is, again, some people might find fun or some people might find really weird that the best healer, or what determines the best healer in 9.1, is going to be damage rather than healing. In terms of your class-specific legendaries, you had some really high hopes for Ventier and Kyrian. But all of a sudden, those class-specific legendaries were heavily nerfed before you were able to combine your wings and Ashen Hallow. You stand in Ashen Hallow for the duration of wings, you get out of it, and then the cooldown resets and you can actually synchronize them. This has been nerfed and is no longer possible. So it's very likely that Holy Paladin is going to go back to a similar build, similar legendary build that they were using in 9.05, with the ability of going more DPS or more healing based on your legendary choices. On top of the fact that Blessing Protection has even more value added due to the healing reduction bleed lieutenant, the fact that you have immunity, and considering that even your mana has been increased or your mana usage has been increased, I was still able to pick up stat increasing anima power, which gave me more DPS, and when I combine it with something like an increased drinking speed, I didn't really have many mana issues when doing these dungeons. But a big disclaimer, guys, it still feels very similar to 9.05 in terms of, hey, Ventier might be amazing in an organized group, but in pugs where people don't really utilize your cooldowns, you might have some issues. For example, you will most likely have to hold on to Ashen Hallow when approaching Fire Lieutenant because the damage or healing requirements are really high. So maybe if your planning is going to be poor, you're gonna have a bad time, so possibly going Kyrian for an easier time or easier cooldown management. Again, this is a very similar advice that you had in 9.05. I don't feel a lot of things are going to change for Holy Paladin. You're going to be doing less damage, and Holy Paladin might not be top by a mile, but it's still looking to be like one of the best healers in 9.1. Now, in my opinion, the second best healer is going to be Resto Shaman. And why? Because it's probably the second best DPS healer. If you look at the logs for 9.005, if you look at a lot of data available, Resto Shaman has the ability of going more DPS through the use of legendaries, and that is going to be the same because Resto Shaman is receiving no changes in 9.1 with the exception of some class-specific legendaries being introduced. So Resto Shaman has good healing on demand. You're not really that cooldown dependent, but you can save cooldowns for something like your Fire Lieutenant because you will need to. You have arguably the second best DPS throughput, and you're getting closer to Holy Paladin because Holy Paladin is getting nerfs. And you have to remember, you're the only healer that has an interrupt, and this is relatively invaluable, especially when approaching pug situations where you can carry keys by having that interrupt. So what's happening for Shaman in terms of covenant choices? Honestly, there's a lot of unknowns in terms of covenant choices because Kyrian right now feels a little bit overtuned, and a lot of people are leaning towards Kyrian, but they're also expecting nerfs. So they're very cautious about which covenant they're gonna go. I do feel that Ventier is always going to be one of the strongest or most safest options for any healer approaching Mythic Plus content because you need those bonuses for Halls of Atonement and Sanguine Deaths. On top of the fact that Chain Harvest plus the Ventier Covenant specific legendary feel extremely good and balanced in terms of providing damage and healing, makes it one of the most fun abilities that I've tested as a healer in 9.1. And then you have choices of going pure DPS with Deep Tremor Totem, if you can keep it alive, or maybe use it on a Lieutenant or use it on a boss. This legendary can give you some significant overall DPS at the end of the dungeon. And in terms of my testing, you might see some sneaky APT totems possibly being used on something like the Healing Reduction Lieutenant because you know someone is going to die, maybe at really high key level or something along those lines. So as Resto Shaman with smart healing use, I was able to pick up the stat increase instead of the infinite mana trait. I was able to pick up the increased drinking speed, and I had very little mana issues with clever use of, healing abilities, because Resto Shaman at the end of the day can be quite mana friendly. And honestly, after that, I feel every other healer is basically on the level playing field, and I feel the healing balance is really not that bad, with the exception of a couple of other healers kind of edging out. So all the other healers I feel are on the similar plane, and we're gonna start off with Restoration Druid. Now, Resto Druid honestly received, again, no significant changes in 9.1 because they're perfect, right? So generally speaking, Resto Druid is going to be in a similar position that it was in 9.05. There's no real cheesability that I found with Resto Druid when approaching Lieutenants, maybe the Root Break and things like that. You still have an insanely strong single target healing, which is very, very relevant for your, the Frosty Boy, the Healing Reduction guy as well, where you might actually try to brute force the single target or the bleed healing, but just having good single target healing. Now, there might be some exceptions to the legendaries you're going to be using, because the Night Fae Convoke the Spirit 1 minute legendary seems to be a very strong option for us to Druid, because it's going to provide, like I said, 1 minute Convoke. That 1 minute Convoke is gonna have a higher chance of giving you Flourish if you want Flourish, giving you like something like Full Moon if you're in Boomkin form. So all of a sudden, 1 minute cooldown that you can use for DPS or healing seems pretty flexible for us to Druid. Plus, this legendary seems to synergize really well with some of the soul binds that you get from Night Fae. Things like Naya, Grove Invigoration. Every 1 minute, which is the Convoke cooldown, you'll be able to get a buff for 30 seconds. That is going to give you 400 mastery on top of extra HP. The uptime is kinda insane, and this legendary is looking like a solid option both in raids and Mythic Plus. So, Resto Druid, and overall a very solid healer, one of the best single target healers, especially when combined with other legendaries, so it's not a bad choice at all. And with Resto Druid and clever use of your healing abilities, you can definitely pick up the stat increase instead of the infinite mana and get the faster drinking speed, which will allow you to have a good mana consumption throughout the whole dungeon. And now let's go to Mistweaver Monk, and honestly I had some really high expectations for Monk because I expected more changes. And there might be more changes during the Heroic Mythic Raid release, which could in turn impact Mistweavers in Mythic Plus, so keep your ear to the ground. So what's happening to Mistweaver? Besides a bunch of buffs in terms of Revival now scaling with Mastery, so you might want to have your Essence Font out before you're pressing Revival. Now you deal more damage, which in turn indirectly buffs your Ancient Teachers on Monastery Legendary, which in turn buffs your Fist Weaving, but at the same time, it does not really compare to the damage of something like a Holy Paladin or Resto Shaman, who's going to go offensively in terms of DPS legendaries. So I still have the same feeling when playing Mistweaver Monk, where I'm trying my best, I stay in melee, I do my full rotation, and my damage is still not really comparable to one of those top healers out there, which creates this grass is always greener on the other side type of feeling. But I do actually feel that the Mistweaver's throughput is actually insane, especially this is a prime candidate for a healer to pick up that infinite mana or blue spheres anima power, because why? You'll be able to spam your enveloping mist when you need to. You won't worry about the mana. Your throughput, or as a healer, you have these burner abilities that cost a lot of mana, but they provide so much throughput. And with the anima trait, you don't have to worry about running out of mana. So this in turn makes Mistweaver arguably one of the strongest throughput healers in Mythic Plus when combined with this anima trait, meaning that maybe there's going to be certain situations where you're going to be skipping lieutenants and you'll be like, hey, don't worry guys, we can skip a lieutenant, we can add additional aura to the end boss, our Mistweaver Monk is gonna brute force the healing. And I do feel that a strong single target healing is going to help out on a lot of lieutenants, the fact that you do have a lot of utility with things like Ring of Peace, AoE stuns and things like that. Mistweaver is a solid choice, I just wish it did more damage, and I'm kind of keeping my ear to the ground on what's happening during the raid release in terms of class changes. And now we go to the Priest, and we're gonna start off with Discipline, because Discipline received, again, it did receive nerfs in terms of Spirit Shell, but that's relevant in Mythic Plus because you're not going to be using Spirit Shell. But there is some really exciting changes that are happening to Discipline Priest in terms of Covenant choices. All of a sudden, Kieran Covenant plus Kieran specific legendary plus Mechanical straight equals, or with enough mobs hit, you can get Boon of Descendant every 1 minute in Mythic Plus, which means every second pack or so. All of a sudden you can have Boon of Descendant for extra damage, extra healing, and extra atonement transfer if you use something like Radiance before your eruption explodes. So now you have a very versatile healer that is dependent on large trash pack pulls or hitting a lot of enemies, which can in turn create good throughput and good DPS. You also have Master Spell as a healer, which can be relevant in Fire Lieutenant, and on top of that, Pain Suppression can be really good for the bleed effect on your healing reduction Lieutenant. But the lack of on-demand single target healing, and I say on-demand because sometimes you might not have cooldowns available, lieutenants, or using your Boon of Descendant on lieutenants, the cooldown reduction is going to be severely reduced. A lot of the times, if you do need that single target healing for a lot of the lieutenants, you might be a little bit in trouble if you don't have cooldowns, especially when you compare it to something like a Mistweaver Monk who has no cooldown on good single target healing through Soothing Mist, Enveloping Mist, and Vivify. And in terms of anima powers for Discipline Priest, I honestly feel this is a prime candidate for picking up that infinite mana on the blue sphere anima trait, because it's gonna allow you to spam Mind Blast on cooldown without having to worry about your mana issues, and all of a sudden Discipline Priest feels a little bit more complete. If you do have to spam a bit of Shadowlands, your mana won't feel as bad with this trait, so I definitely Mistweaver Monk and Discipline Priest prime candidates for blue sphere. And last but definitely not least is Holy Priest, and Holy Priest is like your chill, calm brother or sister of Discipline Priest, because Discipline Priest has this rotation. You have your Boon of Descendant, which honestly can be really iffy based on how much haste you have, and then you have your Holy Priest, who's just chilling and just casting your 5 flash heals and then spamming heal through the whole time with flash concentration. And this build is still looking extremely strong in 9.1. It provides a very relaxing time in Mythic Plus, where you can rely on this like cannon type of healing, where you have splash healing with Trail of Light and things like that. There's a lot of synergies with your Holy Priest talents, and making your Holy Priest one of the most easiest or chillaxed healers, I don't know if that's a word, for Mythic Plus and getting your KSM or pushing high keys. There hasn't been many changes to Holy Priest with the exception of Symbol of Hope, now reducing the cooldown of your party's defensives. But you have to keep in mind, some defensives for certain classes are better than others. And on top of the fact, your party needs to use them in order for you to get benefit out of it. So in pugs, it might not be amazing, but honestly, in organized groups, this could have some real potential, especially when combined or approaching something like the healing reduction Lieutenant, which requires defensives to really survive in really high keys. And in terms of some of the anima powers that I was able to choose, honestly, if you do drop your flash concentration, you probably will want to pick up the infinite mana one, where the blue spheres are going to give you mana, because it is relatively expensive to get the flash concentration buff back up. So if you do drop it, just pick that up and you won't have to worry about it. If not, if you feel adventurous, you can go with the stat increase and get that, increased drinking speed. But I feel that's going to be a little bit more dangerous depending on how good your buff uptime is going to be. And in terms of damage, honestly, the difference between Discipline and Holy is not that big if you compare overall throughput that you can achieve in a Mythic Plus dungeon, but there is a big difference. Discipline Priest does not have to sacrifice healing in order to do damage, while Holy Priest has to make sure that if you're gonna use Holy Fire, no one else is gonna die at that given moment. And that concludes my video and ranking for healers for 9.1 in terms of Mythic Plus and my predictions. I do apologize for the long video. I felt the need to include the Tormented information because I want you to see what you have to deal with and how your healer can approach it. So I felt that was really important. But generally speaking, honestly, I feel the healer balance for Mythic Plus is actually pretty decent. Your Holy Paladin, who was top in 905, is getting a nerf. It's still probably going to be top, but not by a huge margin. I feel Resto Shaman still has that extra edge over other healers because you do have that interrupt. You do have that potential for insane DPS. And every other healer, honestly, feels very, very balanced in terms of what you can provide. And it's also interesting to note that with Holy Paladin, you still have that concept of, hey, organized group, Ventier, you can perform really, really well. But if you play Venter Holy Paladin in Pogues or maybe not time your cooldowns properly, you're gonna have a really, really bad time. So Holy Paladin has a really high skill ceiling, and I feel that's still going to exist in 9.1, which honestly is a good thing in my opinion. Like for example, if you don't have your cooldowns for your Fire Lieutenant or if you don't have your Ashen Hallow, you are going to be in trouble, especially in a higher key. As long as there's no healer that is miles above everyone else, I feel pretty good about this balance. I do think there's going to be some changes happening before Mythic Raid is going to be released, so this list might change a little bit. But generally speaking, guys, honestly, you can play any healer right now for 9.1 and have a good time, and Tormented is really, really fun. Honestly, I'm super excited. Guys, if you like this video, leave a like and subscribe. I'm gonna be doing a bunch of healer content in the next couple of days before 9.1 is released. Let me know how you feel about this video. Who are you maining for 9.1? Thank you, and I'll see you in my next guide.